Before I start with the narrative, I'd like to preface this with the fact I'm going to heavily stretch the definition of rocket jumping. I will mention related ideas, like the more general term blast jumping or rocket riding when it's appropriate. If it involves movement and explosives, it will probably be mentioned. Also, I won't mention all the examples, considering that would make the video take even longer, and I've probably taken too long to release a new video. At this point, I'm not going to talk about anything that isn't games as well. That's not what the video is about. I know there's a scene of, I think, Optimus Prime or another Transformer rocket jumping in the original Michael Bay Transformers movie, but I'm not mentioning that, because why would I mention that? But that also doesn't mean this is going to be short, because it isn't, because I don't know, I just like including everything. Let's jump, or rocket jump, into it. I need to be shot for that joke. Contrary to popular belief, the idea of blast jumping in video games actually predates Doom by several years. The only thing Doom did is combine the ideas of using rockets and their explosions to move. The first game I'm going to mention is Metroid. I already spoiled it in the transition, so why am I even mentioning this? Dunno. All the way back in 1986, the Soviet Union was still a thing, and Nintendo has made the first Metroid game for the NES. This is the first example I could find that could be reasonably considered to be a form of blast jumping. It's not rocket jumping, even though the game literally has rockets, because the designers decided for you to be unable to shoot downwards, because fuck you, in favor of the actual way of dealing damage to enemies on the ground. Roll bombs. You get them pretty early on. To use them, you go into the ball form and then press the attack button to throw the bomb out, for a maximum of 3 at once. This is the first time you can actually blast jump in a video game, and it's very nearly useless. It makes sense that it's forgotten about because it barely does anything. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Here's a side by side of a normal jump and a bomb jump. Not a lot. It is still technically the start. I'm adding the section in post, so I take back what I said about bomb jumping. Some people, not me, are actually very, very good at this, to the point where they can just leave this earthly plane in its entirety. So ignore the image I'm trying to paint here about blast jumping in Metroid being completely useless. It really isn't, since it's actually really, really cool. I just had to look a little bit harder. Anyway, moving on to the next example before Doom, Link to the Past. Nintendo is somehow still at it again, though no idea how intentional adding this stuff is for them, to be honest. Link to the Past example that it brings to the table. The bomb jump. I know, right? Another bomb jump. But it's definitely different enough to warrant mentioning. There are two different main types of bomb jumping. Bonk jumping and early jumping. Not all bomb jumps fit neatly into the definitions, since all jumps are different, but usually they don't stray too far away from these. Bonk jumping requires you to approach the pit with a wall nearby, be within 6 pixels of the pit. You now dash directly into the wall to put yourself in a bonk state, and while in the bonk animation, the bomb explodes and propels you to the other side. There are variations on the step that save time, but the basis of the 6 pixel window and the bomb remains the same. The other type, however, is much harder. Early jumping. Like the name implies, the jump is much more early, mainly due to having no bonk, but this reward doesn't come without increased risk. This means the pixel window is much smaller, going from a safe enough 6 pixels to only 2 pixels. However, the time saved is a whopping 1.8 seconds. And due to having multiple examples of bomb jumping in Link to the Past, a total of 11 examples that I could find, if you do the maths, executing this perfectly every single time, it saves around 20 seconds. Moving on from this obscure speedrun technique from a 90s 2D Zelda game onto the foreshadowed game I have constantly mentioned and is constantly brought up in these types of video essays about rocket jumping. Doom. This is the next step into rocket jumping, the third dimension. Now, to remove any doubt, Doom is not the first-person shooter game, or 3D game. That's Wolfenstein 3D a year earlier, which was admittedly still made by ID Software, the makers of Doom. They just worked under a publisher. And that was not even the first 3D game. The first, debatably, 3D game was 3D Monster Maze in 1981. However, Doom decided to make things a little more vertical, which obviously is going to relate to rocket jumping somewhat, but in a completely different way than you're probably imagining in your head, due to the fact that rocket jumping in this game gives no vertical movement. See, when you rocket jump over a gap, momentum is preserved, so you can actually get above the ground, just not go upwards, if that makes any sense. What's even more important is that it was technically an intended part of the game. In episode 3 of 3, Inferno, the way to access the 9th level was to actually use rocket jumping, as it is, to cross a gap, uncrossable by normal means. This is the first example of not only rocket jumping, but intentional rocket jumping by game design. However, rocket jumping in this game kinda sucks, because as many might know, blowing yourself up is extremely painful, and this makes it extremely hard to actually use this consistently. It's not really used that many times in speedruns. It's very situational at best, so it's fairly uncommon. Look, the reason this is mainly because the levels themselves are just designed to be run through and therefore weren't designed to be rocket jumped through. There's barely any drops you have to even go over. And also, Doom Guy is fast as fuck. Like, this man is a machine. However, that doesn't mean there aren't maps designed to do this specifically. But again, just very basic back then. It kind of didn't really work that well. And that's sort of why I want to move on to the next game, because it actually is a fully fleshed out concept. And for an extension of this part, mainly because the games are similar enough and close enough in release to the point where I can just talk about them in one section, I'm going to talk about Doom 2. Look, the levels were much bigger since they actually wanted to utilize advancements in hardware, though I don't know how much hardware advances in 10 months. This meant that the levels could actually have drops and gaps, which means you can actually, rocket jump in them and it isn't completely useless. But Doom was merely the start of rocket jumping. I'm going to talk about what is probably the main, or one of the main attractions for this video, where rocket jumping is really, really important. Mainly because deathmatch PvP gets really popular, that being Quake. So going beyond Doom 1 and 2, I'm going to skip a few games. Yeah, I know, it's not a fully comprehensive timeline, but trying to make this video before the end of the year, in hindsight that was a very stupid thing to write down, because that is definitely not happening, which means some of these need to be skipped. Some of them, like Marathon for example, sort of don't really have rocket jumping. It has sister ideas like gun climbing, which does use recoil, which makes it a form of explosive jump because the gunpowder in the bullets is undergoing thermal decomposition, which is a form of explosion, but that's too technical and I don't give a shit. In Quake and all the games after, you can actually do a fairly modern rocket jump. And not only rocket jumping, but grenade jumping as well. One of them isn't necessarily always better than the other. Rocket jumping is much easier but gives less height and is able to be done off walls. Grenade jumping can get you much higher, but you have to wait because it's on a timer and it doesn't explode on impact. Also, originally for this section, I was going to have like a whole 7-minute section delving into how good each deathmatch level was for rocket jumping, but I realized that would be really, really boring. So instead, I'll summarize extremely heavily. Place of 2 deaths, really cramped, is a 1v1 map and completely sucks. Claustrophobe. Look, I'm just going to show the name on the screen. This isn't even a bit. I can't pronounce this. Is really, really good since there's a lot of open space and plenty of weapons to jump with. Abandoned Base is also really good because, again, there's lots of weapons, lots of open space, and invulnerability. The Bad Place, something shamelessly stolen from a sitcom that was released 20 years later, is literally made for this. It's completely vertical. The Cistern is okay. I really don't feel anything about Cistern, I've got to be completely honest. And the Dark Zone is really weirdly shaped and is probably quite mediocre for it. If you want the full reviews of these levels, I'm going to flash each of them on the screen for a second, each to fully maximize your information intake to increase average watch time due to overstimulation. If you care that much about what I have to say, I'm going to move on. I'm going to skip its sequels because Quake 2 is not even a sequel. They called it Quake 2 for marketing reasons because there's nothing about it that is Quake related. It's just a shooter game. And Quake 3 is a multiplayer only game, which is definitely noteworthy but it's essentially just Quake 1 but more streamlined and very similar, so I won't talk about it because I've already talked about it. What is noteworthy about the Quake franchise is it did spawn a mod that became a game, that became a sequel to the game of the mod. I don't know if you've heard of it, guys, but you know, it's pretty cool, I guess. For the record, I'm going to put the original mod and the source port into the same entry because they're literally the same thing, just with some graphical differences. So, Team Fortress Classic. Firstly, most classes could grenade jump, as all of them had the ability to throw a grenade out and then obviously jump off it. Also, you could blast jump other teammates. Everyone was affected by explosions, so you could actually propel your teammates into the air. I'm glad this was removed in the sequel because you know how people are, but it would have been really funny. Blast jumping was also useful since the civilian class, Rest Up, could use their own teammates' blast to propel themselves through the map. Anyway, this is all I'm covering about the Team Fortress Classic. I know it's very, very short, but there's, you know, much more worth talking about down the road, the sequel. But before I do that, what I am going to do is a quickfire segment, pun intended, on appearances of blast jumping between 1996, the original Quake mod release, to Team Fortress 2 in 2007. So let's go. Half-Life. Less important for the whole rocket jumping thing, but more important for the creation of an actually advanced physics engine, with the creation of Gold Source, which is obviously linked to Team Fortress Classic, and the entire history of first-person shooters for years to come. Also, you could probably grenade jump in this. Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Not really a bomb jump, but the bomb hover glitch is notable to the fact that when you get up, you don't come down. You literally just hover above the ground. Halo. Grenade jumping was, and is, a speedrunning technique for general use for plenty of skips and such, at the cost of a huge amount of health. Super Smash Bros. Melee. Samus and Link, like earlier, have down specials that plant bombs that can be used as blast jumping, but doing it again is pretty niche and probably not very useful. Metroid Prime. In this Metroid game, you can also bomb jump. The difference is due to you're capable of double jumping with it. Halo 2. Halo makes an appearance again. With this one, there's still obviously grenade jumping, but what's in this game are skulls. One of them, the Sputnik, as appropriately named, allows you to go into space by multiplying your knockback from explosions by 5 times. Half-Life 2. Another Half-Life game on the list. Yes, this is actually the period where Valve made games. The dawn of the Source Physics engine, which was very important for video game physics as a whole, but also especially for rocket jumping and Team Fortress 2, obviously. Also, grenade jumping is a strat used in speedruns for this game as well, and I think it's in episode 2. You can get an achievement for grenade jumping using a steel panel and a grenade, and you throw the grenade under the panel to jump, and then you get an achievement for it. So that's the end of the quickfire round. So on to the main event, TF2. We made it. I'll go through year by year until 2014, where they mostly stopped adding anything relevant. I know there was like Jungle Inferno and Meet Your Match, but they didn't really add much that is relevant. So I'll just talk about the games after 2014. The game releases after 9 years in development. It was worth the wait. Starting out with only 6 release maps, which all vary wildly in how useful rocket jumping is. Best being Granary, where most early competitive matches would take place, since the central point is very well designed for jumper classes. Other maps, like Dust Bolt, favoured by the other ability that was passed down through Sun Tzu's teachings, spam the choke point with explosives. The other maps, Two Fort, the poster child of bum rushing the sniper hideout that persisted on the battlements, was only allowing rocket jumping around 60% of the map. Gravel Pit is such a weird map, and I don't really know what to say about it. It's just so strangely designed. And Hydro, which everyone forgot about immediately after launch.
What the fuck's with rare endangered crabs?
Skipping the Gold Rush update, which adds nothing relevant whatsoever, the Pyro update is important to mention as it firstly added the Air Blast. Yes, I know Pyro didn't have it from launch, which also I feel encouraged more soldiers to think about where their rockets were going, more of them aimed at their feet than down a corridor that actually has no one down it. They also tweaked Soldier in this update by giving him a 40% damage resistance from his own rockets, as before it was just general to whenever, which is encouragement by the devs that, hey, you should be rocket jumping more. The later heavy update, alas, we waited so many years for something we already had added Badwater. Pretty much the perfect map to rocket jump on. The first point, the second point, the third point, the fourth point. Just all the points, great. Just great map.
I mean, look at you, bonk! You seeing this? Boink! That's what I'm talking about!
Starting off weak with the Scout update, giving us the map Junction, which I only include because it is claustrophobic to the point rocket jumping becomes nearly useless. The War update then dropped, which added 4 weapons to Soldier. Only one relevant to discuss, which isn't really a weapon, is the gunboat, swapping a shotgun, and therefore any way of dealing with a competent pyro, for a 6%, 75% at the time, damage reduction for rocket jumping. Some Demo Man weapons were added, but 2 of them for Demo Knight, and the Scourge resistance is very similar and doesn't affect anything, and also I don't really understand why people use this weapon anyway, so jumping for Demo Man remained pretty much the same. The Engineer update was pretty important since firstly, the maps it added.
The Big Thunder! Thunder Mountain, baby, crusty!
Hightower, especially Hightower, Upward and Cold Front are super duper good for rocket jumping and genuinely are good maps. It also added the Wrangler, which should allow for Wrangler jumping for Engineer. On top of how broken the Wrangler was back then, Engineer can do this. Or as I like to dub, the Intercontinental Ballistic Engineer, or ICBE. The next update is also pretty important, as the Man Economy update, apart from adding the loot boxes and its consequences for the entirety of the gaming industry for years to come, he added the Rocket Jumper. This is the rocket jumping weapon in heavy quotation marks. No damage from blast whatsoever. If you want to rocket jump, you can. Demo's version, the Sticky Jumper, was added a month later. And the final, very odd addition of 2010 is the Ullable Caber. Now, some may think, hey, this isn't a rocket jumping weapon whatsoever. How did this get in? Well, you've just got to be a little bit creative about it. And I give it the award of least sober way to blast jump.
Are you sure this will work?
I have no idea!
The Uber update, lowering the cost to completely free for every man, woman and child. And not only that, the man treads were added for Goomba stomping and the market gardener for spinning your enemies, paired together with the rocket jumper to finally create the Trolldier, countered only by pyros, engineers, Natasha heavies, really good snipers, and most importantly, players with game sense. But you'd actually have a good time because all of the free-to-players that now play the game. The Uber update also gave us Barn Blitz, which is probably my favourite map. I just like the design, but it's also really good for rocket jumping. Other nifty stuff includes the detonator for Pyro, which allows for detonator jumping, and the Liberty Launcher for Soldier, which when it was added wasn't helpful, but was later changed on to benefit jumping soldiers. The downside of it being that it's not a very good weapon, like at all. It's the Pyromania update. Contrary to what you'd think, since Soldier's class counter is the main character of this update, this was actually a good update for him, as he was given the Beggar's Bazooka. You've had no damage rocket jumps. The next step is jumping off the air itself. And hey, it's actually a weapon this time, so you can kill people with it. Though it is much easier to kill yourself by accidentally misfiring. The Beggar's Bazooka has bullet spread of about 3 degrees, which makes it much harder to be consistent, so it's basically if you made a soldier do a slot machine every time he wants to do damage, on top of the pre-existing random crit slot machine that's still in the game to this day. The quick fix was also changed, allowing for the medic to jump with you. Now there will be a significant time skip as nothing really happened in 2013. I mean, I'll show the updates on the screen, that's not relevant. I'm just skipping it. Finally arrived at the final update I'm talking about, the Love and War update. The only 2 relevant weapons that are added is the base jumper, which makes you glide down slowly, which on release used to have a feature of updraft when the soldier was on fire. That was cool. Why'd you have to remove that, Valve? It was pretty good on launch, but then Valve decided to half the air control, and redeployment in the air just banned, which in the eyes of the community, nobody cared after that point. I don't think it's the worst thing ever, it's just very situational. It does actually get better with the other weapon I'm mentioning, the airstrike. This is in post. In this section I was about to call the airstrike good, but looking back, trying to find footage of me using the airstrike, I realized it is really bad because you could just use the stock rocket launcher and have the same effectiveness. 2014 gave rise to Jump Academy, which is where you want to go if you want to do or learn any form of blast jumping. I'm not sponsored by them by any means, but I just think if you want to learn how to rocket jump, you should go there. Anyways, this is the end of the line for Team Fortress 2 in this discussion, so let's move on to something else. Originally this part was going to be another listicle, where I list off games that include this trope and probably not add much substance considering I'd only be mentioning them for about 20 seconds. Instead, I'm going to talk about the ones I really like. And if you care that much about the completeness, you have Google. So the ones that will be included here is the hot list of examples I like too much to not mention. First up, another Zelda game. Breath of the Wild. Specifically the two speedrun glitch techniques of wind bombing, which is this, which sends you flying, and a bomb smuggle slide where you physically are inside the bomb and slide across the map. Technically this doesn't classify as a blast jump because there's no explosion, but it's funny. This is also doable in Tears of the Kingdom, but instead Nintendo fixed the bugs from before, so instead all you can do is attach a bomb to a shield and jump on it. It's just not the same. Another example is in Deep Rock Galactic, with the RJ250 or Rocket Jumping 250 compound overclock, which allows your grenade launcher to become a rocket jumper. Credit to Soundsmith for making a whole video on this, you should probably go watch it. But knowing the audience that is watching this video, you probably already watched Soundsmith. And the final example I'm mentioning is ULTRAKILL, which hasn't been fully released yet, but within the layer of Wrath or Off, or however people pronounce it to be honest, you can get the rocket launcher, which can both allow you to ride it multiple times and use the blast wave to jump. But not only that, it's possible with any explosion in that game, such as overpumping the shotgun, basically the Beggar's Bazooka, projectile boosting, which is the method of punching your own bullets to make them explode, which I do not understand the physics of, but it's really fucking cool. It's pretty much a sandbox shooter, so go nuts. And that's it. There's of course more video games that have rocket jumping. The trope has grown and changed into 100 different variations that vary in 100 different ways. I'm sorry I haven't mentioned them all, because there's still a lot of them that I would have liked to talk about, but I don't think this video needs to spend any more time in the oven than it already has. It has been 20 months. And finally, the last thing I mention, which I will not forget, is Rick May's passing. The greatest soldier, and thereby rocket jumper, to ever live. I love you, thanks for staying till the end, in the least parasocial way possible, and if you want to see more things I make, roundhouse that agreement button, tintabulate that bell, and press that satisfaction button. I spent way too long on this and would really appreciate if it did well. Okay? Goodbye.